Great. I'm so excited to see all you guys. And again, thank you to the guys from Reedsy for inviting me to do this. I'm really excited to talk to you today. Who I am. My name is Kate Angelella. I was a children's book editor with Simon Schuster for many years. And there I acquired and edited dozens of novels as well as established series like Nancy Drew and the Hardy Boys. Currently, I'm a full-time book coach and freelance editor, which I love because it combines the best part of my old job, which was working one-on-one with authors and working in my pajamas. I have pajama pants on as we speak. I know I'm not supposed to admit that, but it's one of the best parts of my job. So today I'm going to be talking to you about the top 5 mistakes to avoid when you're writing your YA novel. These are issues that I came across time and time again in manuscript submissions at Simon & Schuster, and they are the most common mistakes I find in my freelance clients' work to this day. So a small caveat on the information I'm about to cover. These tips are largely based on my experience as a house editor and a freelance editor who often works with people who are hoping to get their work published by traditional means. For those who are interested in self-publishing, you may find that there's a bit more flexibility when it comes to industry-based rules. So one of the most common mistakes I find in YA manuscripts is that the main character's age is miscast. Okay, so oftentimes people confuse books that they think will appeal to teen readers with teen books, which are two completely different things. The protagonist of your YA novel should ideally be between 14 and 18 years old, so think like high school age. If you've written a book in which a character is 12 years old, this is a middle grade novel. If you've written a book in which your main character is 19, that's likely going to be considered either a new adult novel or an adult novel depending on your content. So there are in fact many adult novels with teen protagonists in the world, but these books are most often considered adult literature for the reason that the books are written with an adult audience in mind, such as Curtis Sittenfeld's Prep or The Virgin Suicides by Jeffrey Eugenides, both of which feature teen protagonists who are talking about their teen experiences, but through the lens of an adult looking back on their teen lives, rather than as a teen living that experience in the moment. So in a perfect world, books defy categorization. They expand past the confines of their boundaries and are marketed towards a broad array of age ranges and audiences. But in the world we live in, books sell through categories by marketing departments, and as most published authors will tell you, those categories, they matter. If you're writing a YA novel, not only are you writing a book about a teen character, you're also writing through the lens of the teen experience. So YA novels are mostly considered coming-of-age novels, books in which teens are on the precipice of independence, but still tethered to a world of rules set in place by the adults who govern their lives. So YA characters are often navigating teen-centric issues, such as identity, first loves, school-based stories, societal issues, and friendships. They often find themselves just beginning to break away from the adults in their lives, learning who they are and what is important to them in a state between childhood and adulthood. So YA books should be a mirror for their target readers, and your target readers are usually 12 to 18-year-olds. So please note that this does not mean that books that deal with heavy issues like sex, death, violence, drugs, mental illness, etc. fall outside of the YA purview. In fact, I always encourage my clients not to avoid such heavy topics because these are issues real-world teens are facing on a daily basis. In an article about the importance of YA literature, Michael Cart of the Young Adult Library Service Association says, Another of the chief values of young adult literature is in its capacity to offer readers an opportunity to see themselves reflected in its pages. And I don't know about you, but when I was a teenager, reading was such a solace to me, and I would go to the library and look up things by topic, things that I was experiencing, and that I just needed to know that I wasn't alone. So I think that's really important for YA readers. So put that stuff in there because somebody will really appreciate it, I think. So that's character age. Probably the second most prevalent mistake I see in YA manuscripts is that the story starts in the wrong place. So there are always exceptions to every rule, we know that, but the general rule of thumb should be your novel begins on the day that everything changes for your main character. Okay, and that's true for any novel, adult YA or otherwise, but it's especially true in YA literature because your target reader is likely to have far less patience with you and is going to be less willing to wade through the non-essential material to get to the interesting part of the story. Your job when you start a novel is to hook the reader and get them to keep turning that page. Okay, so I'm going to read you a few examples of what you want to avoid in the first pages of your manuscript, in the first chapter. Okay, number 1, too much backstory. You want to begin your story by immersing your character in forward action. When you pause to inform the reader about something that happened before the book began, or you give too much history about who the character is and who their friends and family are and their relationships, it causes the pacing to lag, and it tells me that the story is beginning in the wrong place because the writer is rushing to catch the reader up instead of simply telling the story from this point forward. So backstory is certainly important, and this does not mean that you can't do a little bit of telling and explaining and going into background a little bit, but it shouldn't be extensive. It should just be a sprinkling here and there. Because backstory, it is important and it can be worked in a little bit in the first chapter, but mostly you want it in subsequent chapters, sprinkled in. In the first chapter, you should be striving to sweep your reader away with primarily forward action. Okay, so that's number 1. You also want to avoid, number 2, you want to avoid an unnecessary prologue. This is a notorious pet peeve amongst agents and editors. Again, there are exceptions, but the best prologues are short, sweet, necessary to our understanding of the plot, and don't stray too far from our teen point of view characters. So generally speaking, we don't want it to be like an adult character that when we start the novel, on chapter 1, we have no idea who this adult character in the prologue is. One of the best prologues in a YA novel, I think, that I've read and enjoyed can be found in Holly Black's Valiant, which is right here. Holly Black is a fantastic YA author. If you haven't read her stuff, I highly recommend it. But in general, prologues, if you don't need one, please don't write one. Okay, number 3, the way that a lot of people begin their novels as they're drafting, because it's kind of, they think about starting with the very beginning of your character's day, which makes sense. A lot of people start by beginning their chapters with the character waking up, turning off their alarm clock, and getting ready for school, which is just done so often that agents and editors get really tired of reading it, and readers, if you're self-publishing too, it's something that just happens far too often, and it's just not as interesting as it could be. So this is likely just an ordinary day for most teen characters, and you want to get to the inciting incident as soon as possible. The inciting incident, which is also known as the moment when everything changes for your main character, and they be engaged with the plot of the story. You should always be able to answer the question, why does my story begin right here? What is it about this moment, this day, that is significant? So we've talked about starting your novel in the right place now, making sure your character is the right age. Now I'm going to talk about voice. So Probably one of the single most important elements to any YA novel, in my opinion, is the main character's voice. Voice can best be described as your main character's personality coming through in the words they're using to tell their story. So a lot of new writers assume that voice has solely to do with the way your character's voice sounds in their literal dialogue, which makes sense. That's what it sounds like, the word voice. But when we talk about voice, we're talking about every word on the page, even the punctuation. In my Reads Learning class, the 10 Commandments of Writing YA, I go into more detail about what exactly constitutes voice and how to craft voice well. But for our purposes today, I'll just name a few factors that affect how your main character's voice comes across on the page. So word choice is a big one. The words that your character uses to tell her story. Sentence and paragraph length. Is there one word all on its own in a paragraph? Are there fragments? Are there long flowing sentences? Syntax, which is basically the order of words in a sentence. Punctuation, or the lack of punctuation. Cadence, or rhythm. So one of the biggest mistakes I see YA authors are making is thinking that teen voice means snarky and sarcastic, and that's it. Though these characters may seem synonymous with the teen experience, and they're certainly valid choices, there are as many options for voice as there are personalities in the world, so don't limit yourself to just one. I'm going to read some passages from YA novels so you can hear a few different examples of voice. All of them are excellent YA novels and excellent examples of voice, and books I'd highly recommend. Listen to how each one is different from the others. So just a warning, there is a bit of language in some of these, so if you're sensitive to that, fair warning. The first example is from one of my favorite YA novels of all time, The Princess Diaries, classic YA, by Meg Cabot. Lily's like, Mr. Gianni's cool. Yeah, right. He's cool if you're Lily Moskowitz. He's cool if you're good at algebra, like Lily Moskowitz. He's not so cool if you're flunking algebra, like me. He's not so cool if he makes you stay after school every single solitary day, all in caps, from 2:30 to 3:30 to practice the FOIL method, when you could be hanging out with all your friends. He's not so cool if he calls your mother in for a parent-teacher conference to talk about how you're flunking algebra, then asks her out, all caps again. And he's not so cool if he's sticking his tongue in your mom's mouth. I love that excerpt. Okay, so the first thing that jumps out to me here is word choice. Words such as like, Lily's like, not Lily said, cool, yeah, hanging out. These all have a very casual, laid-back, teen-centric feel to them. Cabot also employs repetition to communicate her main character, Mia's voice. Note in the first paragraph how 2 sentences in a row begin with, he's cool if, and the next several sentences begin with, he's not so cool if. He's cool if you're Lily Moskowitz. He's cool if you're good at algebra. He's not so cool if you're flunking algebra. He's not so cool if he makes you stay after school, etc., etc. So it's almost like she's ticking numbers off a list. And through the repetition, you can feel her attitude. There's some snarkiness present here for sure, and drama. But note that it's not off-putting or sarcastic to the point of meanness or cruelty, which would make us dislike her. Mia is pretty justified in feeling what she's feeling here. She's not overly sardonic. So there are a few places where I mentioned while I was reading, Meg Cabot uses caps lock to get across Mia's dramatic nature, but she's not so ridiculous that we're rolling our eyes. The next example is from a YA sci-fi novel, M.T. Anderson's Feed. We went to the moon to have fun, but the moon turned out to completely suck. We went on a Friday because there was shit all to do at home. It was the beginning of spring break. Everything at home was boring. Link Arweaker was like, I'm so null. And Marty was all, I'm null too, unit. But I mean, we were all pretty null. Because for the last hour, we'd been playing with 3 uninsulated wires that were coming out of the wall. We were trying to ride shocks off them. So Marty told us that there was this fun place for low grav on the moon. Low grav can be kind of stupid, but this was supposed to be good. So that's probably one of my favorite first lines of any novel ever. We went to the moon to have fun, but the moon turned out to completely suck. I love that. What does that sentence say about the main character Titus and about the world he lives in? Throughout this sample, the language is kept casual, like in Cabot's example, but there's a different feel to this voice. While Mia's voice felt a bit dramatic, Titus seems just the opposite. Shit all to do, boring, stupid. Without it being stated outright, Titus comes across as kind of apathetic and passive. And though there are some words in there that Anderson has made up, like null and unit, we're able to understand what they mean through context and understand through the tone that those words, too, are adding to the general cool, dispassionate feel of Titus's voice. The last example comes from a recent YA novel, The Hate You Give by Angie Thomas. This is an astonishingly great book. If you haven't read it, I encourage you to go out and buy it right away. I believe it hit #1 on the New York Times bestseller list its first week out. It's a novel that explores police brutality and systemic racism in America. So here is an excerpt from the first chapter of that novel. We break out the crowd. Big D's house is packed wall to wall. I've always heard that everybody and their mama comes to his spring break parties. Well, everybody except me. But damn, I didn't know it would be this many people. Girls wear their hair colored, curled, laid, and slayed. Got me feeling basic as hell with my ponytail. Guys in their freshest kicks and sagging pants, crying so close to girls they just about need condoms. My Nana likes to say that spring brings love. Spring in Garden Heights doesn't always bring love, but it promises babies in the winter. I wouldn't be surprised if a lot of them are conceived the night of Big D's party. He always has it on the Friday of spring break, because you need Saturday to recover and Sunday to repent. Okay, so here Thomas's main character, Star's voice is thick on the page. Take the sentence, girls wear their hair colored, curled, laid, and slayed. You can feel the rhythm, the cadence of these words. Word choices like mama and everybody, slang like kicks and basic, laid and slayed. From this paragraph, I can tell that Star is very matter of fact. This is how things are, and this is how they'll always be. She calls it like she sees it. There's no room for sarcasm or dramatics or even apathy, as in the other examples I've read from today. She's telling it like it is. No frills. No fuss. We have covered voice, beginnings, and your main character's age. The next mistake to avoid has to do with conflict. I'm sure most of you already know what conflict means, but for clarity purposes, I'll define it as anything that gets in the way of your main character's attempt to achieve her goal. So say, for example, my goal is to get 1,000 words written before the end of my day. Here are some potential sources of conflict for me. Number 1, my apartment, which is suddenly beckoning me to clean it from top to bottom. Or my landlord, who has just knocked on my door to tell me that there's a leaky pipe and there'll be maintenance folks clanging around in my apartment for the rest of the afternoon. True story, it has happened. Or my cat, who, upon hearing the maintenance folks clanging about, suddenly desires to reside in my lap and paws at my hands every time I try to type anything on my computer. Lastly, my professor husband, who is home for the summer and would prefer that I watch another Nicolas Cage movie with him than watch me work on my novel. So these are obstacles keeping me from my ultimate goal of writing, and therefore provide conflict in my day. And conflict is important because it's far more of an accomplishment if I get my 1,000 words in despite all of those things, right? If I got my words in while it was raining outside and no one was around to interrupt me, and I've brewed the perfect pot of coffee and found the perfect playlist as my soundtrack for my work in progress, yeah, of course, I'll get it done, right? It seems like an easy feat that way. It's a more interesting story when there's something for me to overcome. So it's pretty common for writers in a first draft not to put enough conflict in their story, but there's something about YA manuscripts in particular. I find that writers endeavoring to write YA especially tend to avoid putting their teen protagonists through conflict. If I were a therapist, I might hypothesize this has something to do with wanting to shield our teen characters from trouble in their lives. We want to make it easier for them, protect them like instinctive. But conflict is what creates tension, and tension is what makes the pacing of your book fly. So I was once a participant in a YA writing workshop where someone submitted the first 20 pages of their YA novel. In those 20 pages, the 16-year-old girl protagonist finds out her parents are getting a divorce, her boyfriend of 2 years breaks up with her, and then starts dating her best friend. One of the other women in the workshop at one point in the class stops the conversation to tell the author, "Look, I'm worried about your main character. What's going to happen to her? Maybe this is too much, too soon." And I thought, exactly, all of these obstacles make us worry about that character, which means we care. We want to know what's going to happen next, so we turn that page, we invest. In short, let bad things happen to your teen characters. Allow them to make mistakes, as teenagers do. Enforce consequences for their actions on that page. Allow them to get caught when they sneak out, when they stand up in the middle of the cafeteria to take a chance and defend the geek in the corner of the room. Maybe it doesn't erupt in applause the way it might in an old cheesy Disney sitcom. Perhaps instead, your character winds up knocking over a chair in their enthusiasm to help the geek, and as happens in my husband's novel Zombie, and the room erupts in a taunting chant of dork, 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 and the main character slinks down in his seat, utterly humiliated. Put as many obstacles in your character's way as you reasonably can. Your plot and your reader will thank you for it. Now we've talked about conflict, voice, beginnings, and your main character's age. Now we're going to talk a bit about writing into trends, which is a really, really popular topic for YA in particular. More than any other words, the following are the ones I hear spoken most often about why clients finally decided to sit down and write a YA novel. How hard could it be? Okay, there's something impossibly beguiling about the possibility of a big payday, and because of the success of writers like Suzanne Collins and John Green, Stephanie Meyer, I think a lot of people sit down to their computer screens with dollar signs in their eyes, hoping that their YA novel will be the next best thing. And look, I'm not here to squash your dreams. Why couldn't you be the next big thing? Somebody has to be. Why couldn't it be you? Instead, I just want to caution you about writing solely to cash in on trends. There are two big problems with writing into trends. The first is timing. The nature of trends is that they are ever-changing and really hard to predict. So often, by the time you finish your on-trend novel, by the time you finish writing that, the trend is already past. It's over. Now, I know that self-publishing is different. It moves faster than traditional publishing. You're not having to wait on the publisher's time schedule and everything, and you're not as beholden to trends that way. But the reality is that writing a book, a good book, should take you some time. So no matter how you decide to publish, timing will always be an issue when it comes to trends. The second and most important problem with writing into trends is that when you're writing something you're not passionate about, your readers can see that on the page. If you ask any agent or editor, they'll tell you they can see the difference. They get hundreds of submissions every month that are regurgitations of best-selling plots and characters, yet the regurgitations don't shine the way the original did because A, it's not original, and B, the authors are simply trying to capitalize on the trends rather than writing what they're passionate about, what comes from their heart and their imagination. So I recently attended an AWP conference in DC, which is a writing conference that happens every year, where best-selling YA author Nova Suma led a panel of authors, and each spoke about writing their experiences writing the novel of their hearts. Bennett Madison, author of the YA novels September Girls and The Blonde of the Joke, had an interesting take on writing into trends. He agreed that writing a novel for the sole purpose of capitalizing on a trend is not the best idea, but he suggested looking at trends as a means to spark inspiration in you, more like a jumping off point than for an entire reason to do something. I really like this because who's to say you can't write from a place of passion and be writing something that happened to have been on trend at the same time. But making sure it's a topic you really care about, something that inspires and excites you, is the key. Otherwise, you're writing just to please others and fill a quota, which is the formula for a tepid book at best. Again, I talk about this more at length in my Reads a Learning course, but Nova Suma wrote a great blog post about what happens when you write for other people instead of for yourself. It's called The Unstuck Story of the Walls Around Us. You should definitely Google that post. It's so inspiring and it's very freeing as a writer. I really enjoyed it. And it's about her own personal experience writing the book that ultimately landed her at the top of the bestseller list. So it's really worth a read. Thank you so much for listening to me talk about all of these mistakes to avoid when writing YA. And if you have any other questions for me, please hit me up on Readsy. If you're interested in my service as a book coach or an editor, my profile is up on Readsy. You can contact me through them. And I'm always here to answer any of your questions. So I really appreciate all of you guys being here with me today and talking to me about, or listening to me talk at you about the 5 mistakes you want to avoid, 6 mistakes you want to avoid in writing YA. Thank you so much. I hope you all have a great night.